This is Velvet Hour, slow bedtime stories to help you drift off and sleep through the night. Tonight's story: Apple Orchard Cottage at Dusk. By the time you come to the edge of the orchard, the afternoon has already begun to lean toward evening. The light is still warm, though it has thinned a little, as if it has been strained through many leaves. Bees move among the last open clover by the path, not in any hurry, and the sound they make is so low it seems to rest in the air more than pass through it. Beyond the trees, the cottage waits in its place of habit, with a short stone path, a sloping roof, and 2 baskets of red apples cooling beside the door. On the windowsill, just visible through the glass, there is a shallow basket of pressed leaves, and one narrow red leaf has a dark stem that touches the wicker rim. The orchard is not arranged in straight lines, the way some are. The trees stand with a little space between them, each one turned slightly in its own direction, as if they had all chosen where to stop many years ago and had never thought to move again. Their branches are full, though not heavy now, and the apples that remain hang in scattered places where the light can find them. A few fallen ones lie hidden in the grass, giving off the mild, sweet scent that belongs only to fruit resting where it has landed. The path under your feet is packed earth with flat stones set into it at uneven intervals. Dry blades of grass bend over the edges of the stones and sway when the faintest breath of air passes through. You do not need to walk quickly, because there is nowhere to be before you are here. Each step carries the same small sound from the ground, a hush of dust, a gentle brushing at the hem of the path. To one side, a ladder leans against an old trunk where the bark is silvered with age. It has already been left for the day, and in the slanting light, its rungs hold slender bars of shadow. Near the ladder, a canvas picking bag hangs from a peg on a fence post, turned inside out to air. It stirs once, very slightly, then becomes still again. The cottage door is painted a blue that has softened over the years into something almost gray in the shade and quietly bright in the sun. Beside it, the 2 apple baskets rest on the flagstones where the stones still keep a little warmth from the afternoon. The apples are round and red, but not all the same red. Some have a bloom like dusted velvet. Some are streaked with yellow. Some show a shallow green near the stem where the leaf once sheltered them. The wicker of the baskets is pale where many hands have held it smooth, and the handles are tilted toward one another as if they have come to rest in conversation. From the chimney comes a line of wood smoke so thin it seems more like a change in the air than a shape within it. The scent reaches you before you lift the latch. It carries a little dry oak, a little applewood, and somewhere underneath that, the warm grain of cinnamon. Not the sharp first scent from a jar just opened, but the softer cinnamon that has had time to sit near heat and deepen. It belongs to the house now. It has gone into the curtains, into the shelf wood, into the apron hanging on its hook, into the very quiet of the room inside. When you open the door, the hinges say almost nothing. The cottage has the hush of a place that knows the order of its own evening. Air from indoors meets the orchard air at the threshold, and for a moment they rest together. The floor inside is made of wide boards, worn pale in the middle where many footsteps have passed and darker along the walls. A small rag rug lies near the door with one corner turned back as if it had lifted a little and then changed its mind. Beside the hearth, a kettle sits near enough to the stove to keep warm, and on the sill above the front window is the basket of pressed leaves. That basket is shallow, made of split willow gone honey brown with years, and lined with a folded square of old linen. The leaves inside are laid in loose layers, not stacked with any great order, just gathered and left together after they had flattened. Oak, maple, apple, beech. Some are crisp enough to keep their shape. Some have curled at one edge despite the pressing. One leaf near the top is narrow and dark red, almost the color of baked brick, with a stem so slender it looks drawn there with ink. Its stem touches the wicker rim, and when the air from the open door reaches it, there is the faintest dry click, then silence, then, after a little while, another. The room is not large, which means every object has a way of being clearly itself. A pine table stands under the side window. 2 chairs, one straight-backed and one with arms worn smooth, face the hearth at a gentle angle. A shelf of crockery sits above a workbench where a wooden spoon rests in a stoneware bowl. On hooks by the mantel hang a tea towel, a pair of thick mitts, and a little brush for sweeping ash. Light falls in through the west window in broad stripes, crossing the floorboards and the table and the edge of the rug. Dust moves in that light so slowly that it hardly seems to move at all. You close the door with a hand kept on the latch until the catch settles. The room changes by a small degree. Outside, sounds soften. The bees remain, but now they are behind glass and timber, and their low drifting note seems to come from somewhere beyond the day itself. The scent of apples by the door enters the room in a calm way, as if the baskets have brought part of the orchard in with them. Over all of it is that steady, settled trace of cinnamon and wood smoke, resting in the boards and the curtains and the worn sleeves of the chair. A quiet figure is already part of the room, as ordinary in the cottage as the table or the hearth. There is nothing ceremonial in the way this evening begins. A hat is set on its peg. A pair of garden gloves is laid beside the door. A shawl, light enough for this season, is folded over the arm of the chair and then lifted again, not because the room is cold, but because evening has started to think about arriving. These are movements done without any need to mark them. They are simply the first few stones in a path of familiar tasks. The apples by the door are looked over one by one, not with judgment, only with attention. One basket is nudged a little farther from the threshold, so the cooling fruit is out of the way of the swinging door. An apple with a leaf still caught at its stem is lifted, turned in the palm, and set back with the leaf facing upward. Another is wiped with the corner of an apron and placed near the top because its skin has a pale stripe worth seeing in this light. The wicker creaks once when the handle is eased down. Then even that small sound fades into the room. On the sill, the leaf basket stays where it has been all afternoon. Yet now, with the door closed, the air in the cottage takes on another pattern. The narrow red leaf near the top does not move at once. It waits. Then a thread of warmth from the stove rises toward the window, meets cooler glass, and slips back down. At that moment, the leaf stem gives its tiny tap against the wicker rim, not loud enough to interrupt thought, only enough to be noticed if the room is already quiet. You move farther in, and the floorboards answer with the low voice they reserve for old houses and patient feet. Nothing inside asks to be done quickly. A crock is lifted from the shelf. A folded cloth is straightened near the sink. A spoon left to dry is placed in its jar handle up. The gestures are small and complete in themselves. Each one seems to settle the room a little more firmly around the coming evening. At the back of the cottage, a second door opens toward a narrow yard where a woodpile is stacked beneath a lean-to roof. The yard is bordered by a low wall of stone, gone soft with moss in the shaded seams. Beyond it, the orchard continues for a while and then gives way to a field where the grasses are turning from green to straw. When the back door opens, the air enters cool and fragrant with leaf and bark and distant earth. It moves across the floor in a thin current, and in the front room, the red leaf on the sill answers with that same dry little click. A few logs are brought in, not many. Just enough for later, when the light lowers and the room begins to ask for one more measure of warmth. The wood is split applewood, stacked by size, with pale-cut faces and bark that flakes in fine, shallow scales. One log leaves a dusting of dry wood grain on the sleeve that carries it. Another has a patch of lichen that looks almost silver against the brown. They are set beside the stove in a neat crossing where they wait without impatience. The cottage has a pantry no wider than a closet and as orderly as a drawer that is opened often and closed with care. Glass jars stand shoulder to shoulder there. Dried herbs, oats, tea, flour, sugar, and a jar of cinnamon sticks with curled ends the color of polished bark. A hand reaches in and chooses one stick, then another, not because two are needed, but because the first is shorter and the second feels right for this evening. When the jar is closed again, the scent remains in the air, sweet and dry and woody, and lingers in the doorway as if it had paused there. The kettle is lifted and filled. Water meets tin with a sound so simple it almost disappears under itself. A small pot is set near the stove with slices of apple and one broken cinnamon stick laid inside. No recipe is followed. There is no need. This is not a task measured by outcome. It is a way for the room to fill gradually with one more layer of afternoon turning into evening. On the table near the window lies a folded cloth with a line of hand-stitched blue along the edge. It is opened and spread, not for guests, not for any event, only because the table feels ready for it. The cloth falls into place with one corner a little uneven. That corner is adjusted by 2 fingers and then left slightly imperfect all the same. Sunlight reaches across it, showing the weave in alternating bars of brightness and shade. The blue stitches at the hem look darker where the fabric dips between the boards beneath. By now, the first warmth has reached the pot. The apple slices soften at their edges. The cinnamon begins to travel. It does not rush. It slips into the room in the same unhurried way light slips from one floorboard to the next. The scent joins the wood smoke already resting in the walls and the mild, cool sweetness of the apples by the door. None of them overtake the others. They simply share the same hour. At the window, a bee hovers on the outside of the glass for a little while, as if deciding whether the brightness within belongs to the day or to something after it. Then it drifts away toward the orchard. The shadow of a branch crosses the sill. The basket of pressed leaves does not quite shift, but one corner of the linen lining rises and settles again. The red leaf stem taps once against willow. It is a sound with hardly any length to it, and yet it seems to mark the passage of the light more clearly than a clock. The first part of the evening routine belongs to putting away what the day has left near at hand, not because there is clutter, but because every object settles best in the place that knows it. The gloves by the door are brushed free of dried grass and put on the shelf above the boots. A pruning knife is wiped and folded, then slid into the drawer beside a length of twine. The canvas picking bag outside is brought in from its peg and hung over the back chair to air a little longer before being folded. It hangs there with its straps slowly untwisting, making a shape like a sail gone calm. A small bowl of apples with bruised skins is carried from the threshold to the counter by the stove. These are not fruit for storing. They are the ones that will become the evening's little simmering pot, or tomorrow's sauce, or the filling of a pie if the day ever feels right for that. One apple is cut, and the knife passes through with a quiet firmness, part crispness, and part giving way. The slices are not even, though none of them are careless. Seeds are set aside in a blue-rimmed dish. Peels gather in a curl that slides slowly from the cutting board to the waiting bowl. The work at the counter is done facing the side window. From here, the orchard appears in a shifted way, as if the trees have moved half a step closer while you were elsewhere. Their leaves show more underside now as the breeze changes. Branch tips sway with such small motion that the eye can almost mistake it for stillness. A few bees are still working among the late flowers near the fence, but each one seems heavy with the day. Their flight paths have softened. They drift from blossom to blossom as if the air itself were thickening into evening. When the peels are taken out to the compost crock by the back step, the yard seems suspended in a golden pause. Light rests on the stone wall and on the handles of the garden tools leaned against it. A shirt hung earlier on the line has dried and now scarcely moves at all, except for one sleeve that turns inward and then out again. The field beyond the orchard has gone quieter. Even the grasses seem to sway below notice, their heads bending together in one long, slow thought. You set down the peels and stand for a moment with the door still open behind you. From there, if you look back through the cottage, you can see the front window and the basket on the sill. It is far enough away that the leaves inside are only shapes of russet and gold and dark and green. Yet, the narrow red one near the top catches a thread of light and briefly shows its stem like a fine line of black. You do not hear the little tap from out here. Still, you know the room well enough to imagine it when the breeze from the back door reaches the front. A house of few sounds teaches you the ones it keeps. Inside again, the spoon in the simmering pot is turned once. Not stirred hard, only moved enough that the apple slices shift their places. Steam rises in a light ribbon and vanishes before it reaches the beam above. A ceramic mug is set on the table, then another beside it without reason, and after a moment, the second is returned to the shelf. The first remains. It is cream-colored with a tiny chip at the base of the handle where glaze once lifted and left a darker crescent beneath. It has become the mug most often chosen in the middle of the week and in this season of apples. On a low shelf near the hearth sits a stack of folded newspapers saved for kindling. Their corners are softened by use and time. One sheet is shaken open and then folded down into loose strips, not yet for the fire, only to have them ready. The paper speaks in a papery whisper and then falls quiet. Beside the stack lies a box of matches with a green label faded so much it almost belongs to no color now. It is turned over in the hand once, then set back. The stove still holds enough warmth from earlier. There will be time. The evening routine moves next toward the windows. Not to close the world out, only to gather the room around itself. The back casement is eased in by a small degree so it remains open at the top and shut at the latch side. The curtain there, made from unbleached linen, changes from an outward billow to a more thoughtful inward drift. At the front, the lower half of the window stays closed, while the upper pane is left cracked by the width of a finger. It is enough for the orchard air to enter now and then. It is enough for the red leaf to find its little sound. The sill itself is wiped with a cloth where a line of dust has collected beside the leaf basket. The basket is lifted with both hands and then set down again in nearly the same place, perhaps a thumb's width farther from the glass. That small change shifts the angle of the leaves within. The top ones settle. The narrow red leaf slips half a breath lower, and its stem comes to rest more firmly against the wicker rim. When the cloth passes under the basket, a faint rectangle of paler paint is revealed, where the sun has not faded the wood. Then the basket returns and claims the shape again. In the bedroom alcove, the bed has already been made since morning, but evening gives it another look. The coverlet is smoothed once more where a crease has wandered across it. A pillow is fluffed and then pressed lightly at its center, becoming neither fuller nor flatter, only somehow more finished. On a peg by the narrow chest hangs a dressing gown of brushed cotton, faded plum with a sash that has grown soft at the edges. It is taken down and laid across the foot of the bed, where it makes a loose fold like the curve of a hill in shade. At the washstand, a basin is filled with water from the pitcher. The pitcher is white with a blue ring around its throat, and one side has a tiny glaze crack that branches no farther than a thumbnail. Water rings the basin in a bright rim. A bar of soap rests in a dish with a sprig of lavender pressed into its surface from long ago, though the scent now is faint and almost all memory. A folded cloth is placed beside it, and a comb is set parallel to the edge of the stand. These are ordinary objects, but the order of them makes the small room feel complete. Back in the main room, a chair is drawn slightly closer to the window, not enough to notice unless you had known where it stood before. This is the chair with arms worn pale where forearms have rested over many evenings. Its cushion has flattened into a shape that remembers use. On the table beside it, a book lies closed with a ribbon tucked halfway through, though reading may or may not happen tonight. Some evenings the book is opened, Some evenings the room itself is enough and words would only be another object to put away later. The orchard changes tone in slow degrees. Light moves from yellow toward amber, and the red on the apples by the door deepens to something quieter. Shadows from the nearest branches come longer across the threshold stones. A single leaf lets go somewhere outside and takes so long to reach the ground that you only know it has fallen because it was there and then it was not. The bees have thinned into just one or two wandering sounds. Their drowsy crossings pass near the window and drift on. A shallow pan is brought from the shelf and set on the stove to warm. Into it goes a little butter, not enough to sizzle, only enough to melt into a pale gloss. A few apple slices follow, and a spoonful of sugar, and the last of the broken cinnamon. The pan is tilted so the butter travels from one side to the other in a slow, shining sheet. The slices are turned when they begin to color at their edges. It is not a meal in itself. It is only a kitchen way of letting the evening become fragrant. At the far end of the table stands a wooden bowl full of mending, a sock turned inside out, a cuff with a loose thread, a napkin whose hem has wandered. The bowl is brought nearer the chair and looked through. The sock is chosen first, perhaps because it asks least, or perhaps because this is the sort of evening suited to such small completions. Needle, thread, darning egg, each appears from a drawer that keeps them together. The routine is unhurried enough that the finding of the tools feels almost like part of the mending. As the needle goes in and out, the room narrows gently around the work. Thread draws a small path through wool and returns over it, making order where there had been a loose place. The hands move with a steadiness that comes not from practice alone, but from lack of urgency. There is no pile to finish. There is no ticking requirement. A few stitches are enough for now. If the thread ends before the task does, the rest can wait for another evening. The red leaf on the sill does not care whether the sock is mended. Still, it keeps time with the air. From the stove, a current rises. From the upper window, a cooler one slips downward. Where they meet, the basket lining trembles so slightly it is almost only the idea of motion. Then comes the tiny stem click, dry as paper on wicker. It is not regular. It never repeats exactly. That is why it is easy to keep hearing without ever expecting it. Outside, the low wall by the yard has taken on a deeper color. Moss in the cracks looks greener now against the stone, and the field beyond is losing detail, becoming one broad resting place of straw and muted green. The shirt on the line has been brought in and folded over the back of the kitchen chair. In its place, the line itself remains, a single slack curve between posts, moving so faintly that it seems to have borrowed motion from the horizon. Along the path, the clover heads lean in one direction and hold there. A loaf wrapped in cloth sits in the bread box. The cloth is opened. A small heel is cut and laid on a plate, then another thinner slice added beside it as if the first looked lonely there. The warmed apples from the pan are spooned over the bread. Their juices sink in at the edges and make the crust shine. The plate is carried to the table with the mug. There is no fanfare in this simple meal. It belongs to a person who knows that evening asks less and less as it goes on. From the pantry comes a jar of tea leaves that smell of black tea and a little bergamot and a little something floral too mild to name at once. A pinch is dropped into the pot. Water from the kettle follows. The lid is set on. The pot is wrapped in a small quilted cozy made from scraps of old dresses stitched together in quiet faded colors: plum, cream, blue, russet. It sits there looking as if the tea has been tucked in for its own rest. A minute passes, and then another, and they do not need to be counted. The first sip is taken standing by the window. The tea is warm without being hot enough to demand notice. Outside, an apple branch bends down under the memory of fruit, even where fruit is no longer hanging. Leaves on that branch show small silver flashes as they turn. One bee passes close to the pane, moving with a heavy certainty toward some place beyond the cottage wall. The basket of leaves remains at the side of the frame. The narrow red one lifts its stem and lets it fall back. Click. After tea and bread, the plate is rinsed and left in the rack to dry. The mug is washed too, though tea has barely marked it, and set upside down on a folded cloth. The spoon from the simmering pot is licked clean of cinnamon apple sweetness and washed with the rest. These are motions too ordinary to need thought. They are almost one long, continuous gesture from counter to basin to cloth. Water in the wash bowl catches the dimming light and keeps a brighter patch in the room for a little while. There is a small broom by the hearth with sorghum bristles bound by red thread. It is taken up to gather the day into corners. Not because the floor is dirty, only because evening likes a floor that has been spoken to by a broom. A few dried leaves near the threshold, a drift of dust under the chair, one wood shaving by the stove, a breadcrumb under the table. They come together easily and are carried out to the step. On the stone outside, the crumbs are left for whatever small evening hunger may pass before dark. The broom is returned to its hook. The ash brush is lifted next and used around the stove door where a little gray powder has gathered. It makes no complaint when moved. Ash is the quietest thing in the room. Even when brushed, it only shifts from one shape to another. A small metal pan receives it, and then it too is set aside. Later, it will go to the edge of the garden beds, where nothing is in bloom now, but where the soil is always listening. As daylight softens further, the objects in the room begin to keep company by outline more than by color. The table darkens a shade. The crockery shelf becomes a row of pale ovals. The mending bowl turns into one round basin of shadow with the pale cuff of a napkin draped over its edge. Yet some things hold the light longer. The cream mug drying upside down, the blue stitches in the tablecloth hem, the basket of apples by the door where each fruit keeps a muted glow on the side facing the window, and on the sill the red leaf, which is darker now but still distinct. You move to the shelf of books and run a finger along the spines. They are cloth-bound, some plain, some with gilt letters worn almost away. A book of weather notes, a volume of poems with a loose back hinge, a household manual written in a patient hand by someone long gone, a notebook tied with string. One book is chosen and brought to the chair, then set on the table unopened while the light is considered. It may still be enough to read by for a little while. It may not matter if it is not. A lamp with a brass base stands on the side table by the chair. Its shade is pleated and slightly crooked where the seam has relaxed over time. The brass is polished only where hands most often touch it. Near the switch, the metal carries a deeper glow from years of use. The lamp is not yet lit. For now, it remains part of the late afternoon, holding itself ready. Beside it, a box of wooden spills waits near a squat candle in a dish of blue glass, though neither is needed just yet. Through the open upper pane comes the smell of the orchard cooling. It is different from the smell at noon. Less green, more bark, more fruit skin, more distant earth where the day's warmth has settled low. The apple baskets at the door answer that scent with their own stored sweetness. One apple shifts imperceptibly against another and makes a soft skin-to-skin rub. It is the sort of sound you hear only because nothing else is pressing over it. Then from the sill comes the red leaf's smaller note, so brief it almost hides inside the first. The book is opened at last. A page turns. Another. The paper is thick and faintly rough. Reading here is never hurried. Eyes move down the page, pause, return to the start of a line, not because it was difficult, but because dusk has begun to gather in the corners of the room. A paragraph is finished. A hand remains between the pages for a while instead of turning to the next. Outside, the bees are gone from hearing now. The branch shadows stay on the path without moving enough to notice. Some evenings call for a little preserving. Not jars and long boiling and all the work of it, only a small thing to carry one season into the next. Tonight, it is apple slices laid thin on trays for the low oven later, with a dusting of cinnamon and a touch of sugar. The trays are pulled from the cupboard. Their tin bottoms carry old scratches in pale crossed lines. Slices are arranged with spaces between them, not perfectly measured, only kept from touching. The work is repetitive in the best way, each round pale moon of apple set down and then another. As the trays fill, the cut surfaces of the apples begin to deepen from white to cream. The room smells more clearly of fresh fruit now, brighter than the simmering sweetness by the stove. One slice is eaten while standing at the counter. Another is cut in half and added to a gap on the tray where nothing fit quite right. The knife is wiped. The board is turned around simply because the grain is prettier from the other direction. These are the tiny decisions from which a quiet evening is made. A cloth is draped over the bowl of remaining slices so they do not dry before they go into the oven. The cloth settles over the rim and takes the shape of what it covers, a little hill with folds on either side. From the front room, the red leaf gives its tap. It has begun to feel like a companionable interruption, the room's way of reminding you that air is still moving, even when the curtain seems still and the orchard looks painted in place. Movement does not need speed to be real. It only needs time. By now, the western light reaches lower under the trees. Trunks stand darker while the upper leaves still catch brightness. Some apples in the far rows are no longer visible, though the branches that hold them are. The sky beyond the field has widened into a softer color, blue paling toward a kind of washed silver above the horizon. A rook passes high over the orchard without a call. Its shadow does not reach the cottage. A little while later, one leaf floats down in the yard and lands against the stone wall where it stays. The stove is opened and looked into. Embers from earlier are banked low under a lacework of ash. One folded strip of newspaper is laid in. then a handful of twigs, then one small split log. A match is struck. It makes a brief flare of sulfur and then becomes only flame. The paper curls inward at its edges and glows. The twigs catch with small bright points that quickly quiet into a steady burn. The stove door closes softly and, behind its pane, the fire becomes another form of slow movement, inward and patient. The cottage responds at once, though subtly. Metal on the kettle pings once as it warms. The side of the stove gives off a deeper heat, enough to shift the air near it. The curtain by the back casement lifts and falls with a different rhythm now, and the basket on the front sill, receiving that altered current from room to window and window to room, offers up the red leaf's tiny stem tap again, then waits. It is a modest sound, but by now it has gathered a small history of the evening around it. A drawer in the sideboard holds candles wrapped in tissue. One is taken out and set in the blue glass dish, though still unlit. Another, shorter and stubbier, is placed on the mantel as if just to keep it company. Matches are brought from the hearth to the table and left there with the book. The order of the room is changing toward night. It is not a change of haste or alarm. It is only the old steady exchange by which daylight hands things over. A shawl is drawn over the shoulders now, the same one that waited on the chair earlier. Its wool is soft from years of wearing and mending, its fringe a little uneven at one end where a knot has been retied. When it is settled, one corner drifts near the arm of the chair and almost touches the floor. The plum gown in the bedroom remains where it was placed, for later. For now, the shawl is enough. It carries with it a faint trace of cedar from the chest where it spends summer days. The book receives another page or two in the growing dimness. Then the lamp is turned on. Its light does not flood the room. It arrives quietly, a circle on the table, a warm edge on the chair arm, a softening touch on the book's paper. The brass base holds a muted glow. A fly speck on the shade becomes visible where it had vanished in daylight. Beyond the lamp's reach, the cottage is still dusk, but no part of it is lost. Rather, each thing has chosen how much of itself to show. With the lamp lit, the basket on the sill is half in shadow. The leaves there flatten into layered shapes, except for the narrow red one whose stem now catches the lamp from the side. It glints for an instant like a dark, polished line, and then disappears again. A movement in the curtain, a shift in the cooling glass, and there comes the familiar click, delicately dry. It belongs to evening as fully as the smell from the stove or the dim red of the apples at the door. Mending returns to the lap for a little while. This time it is the napkin hem. The blue thread chosen to match it is not perfect, but close enough that only a searching eye would mind. The hem is folded under and guided between finger and thumb. A stitch enters, vanishes, reappears. The lamp makes a bright oval on the cloth. Beyond it, the room waits in its dimness without complaint. Nothing in the cottage minds being attended to, one at a time. When the thread is knotted and cut, the napkin is folded into quarters and placed back in the bowl. The mending tools are not yet put away. They remain on the table as if the evening might still want them. The tea in the pot has gone to a deep amber and is poured into the mug again. It is stronger now and cooler by a little, and all the better for that second pouring. Outside the upper window, the orchard air has become still enough that the smell of smoke from the chimney hangs low among the first branches before drifting away. A pause comes then, one of those stretches that hold no named task at all. The chair takes the body's weight. The lamplight reaches the edge of the sill. The stove makes its occasional soft, settling sound. Through the front pane, one apple tree nearest the house keeps almost all of its form, while the farther trees merge into one broader dark. There is no need to fill this pause. It is a true part of the routine, as necessary as laying wood or rinsing a cup. The pressed leaves on the sill have their own version of waiting. They have already given up the bright life of the branch and the wind and the green sap running through them. Now they keep color and shape in a quieter way. The basket's linen lining shows a crease where it was once folded. A yellow maple leaf near the bottom has a tiny tear by one point. The narrow red leaf, still near the top, bears a faint line down its center where the pressing did not fully flatten the vein. That little ridge lifts first when the air changes. A pair of socks left drying by the stove are taken up and folded together heel to toe. A tea towel is turned to its drier side. The cloth over the apples on the tray is lifted and checked, then laid back down. At the window above the sink, a single herb pot of thyme is turned a quarter turn so its greener side faces the room. This does nothing necessary. Still, the plant now seems to sit more comfortably in its place. Sometimes evening is made of these gentle agreements with objects. The low oven receives the trays of apple slices at last. They slide onto the racks with a thin, metallic hush. The door closes. Soon the slices will begin their slow change, edges dimpling, flesh turning supple, sweetness deepening almost imperceptibly. There is no expectation of finishing them tonight. The oven can hold a patient heat for hours. It suits the cottage well, this way of working by gradualness rather than declaration. The side table holds a small dish of walnuts gathered some days earlier. Their shells are pale brown and ridged like little brains, weathered smooth by handling. One is cracked with a handheld nutcracker wrapped in cloth so the sound stays mild. The meat is lifted out in halves if possible, fragments if not, and eaten with no concern for symmetry. A second walnut is left uncracked in the dish. The room likes to keep one thing unfinished, as if to prove that the evening is not a list to be completed. The lamp and stove together create two gentle centers of warmth, and between them the chair sits in the best place of all. Yet the room remains tied to the window. The orchard, even as it darkens, continues to send in its faint impressions. A branch drawing one shadow over another. The almost impossible movement of grasses beyond the trees. The upper pane cooling enough to silver slightly at the edges. And always, now and then, the red leaf stem on wicker, giving its tiny report that some current has passed. At last, the book is set aside with the ribbon placed a few pages ahead. That gesture means tomorrow as much as it means tonight. A notebook from the shelf is untied and opened instead. Its pages hold small entries. Not dates with any strictness, only weather, orchard notes, things baked, seeds saved, first frost guessed at, and then guessed again. A line is added about the apples gathered today. Another about bees among the clover near sunset. And perhaps a final line, brief and plain about the leaf basket sounding at the window all afternoon and into evening. The pen is dipped lightly and wiped before the notebook is closed. Ink dries while the hand rests on the cover. Then the string is wound around and tucked under itself. The notebook returns to its place. It does not need to be read back through. Writing here is not for record alone. It is one more evening movement, like banking the fire or folding the shawl. A way of letting the day settle into words before it settles into dark. Now the candle in the blue glass dish is lit after all. Its flame stands small beside the lamp, and for a moment the room seems to hold two different ideas of light. The lamp is steady and domestic. The candle is slower, more visibly alive. It bends when the back curtain shifts. It straightens. It reflects in the window as a small second flame hovering among the orchard shadows. The basket on the sill gains a rim of gold on one side, and the red leaf becomes briefly brighter, then dark once more. The apples by the door are checked before full night comes. One basket is covered with a cloth against the cooler air that will gather there later. The other is left open, perhaps because the fruit in it is meant for use soon. A hand passes over the apples without touching, feeling the cool held above their skins. One fruit near the top has a star of russet around the stem. Another has a tiny leaf-shaped patch of lighter red. They rest as if each has found the shape of the basket and accepted it. With every task completed or set aside for morning, the room gains a softer emptiness. Not emptiness of lack, but of enough. The counter is wiped. The knife is dried and returned. The tea cozy is shaken once and put back on its hook. The mending bowl goes to the shelf, though the repaired sock remains draped over its edge as if pleased with itself. At the window, the pressed leaves hold their places. The red stem clicks once more, lightly, from a movement so small the candle flame does not answer it. Night does not arrive all at once at the orchard's edge. It gathers itself in layers, first under the trees, then along the field, then in the corners of the stone wall, then in the spaces between the apples and the baskets by the door. Indoors, the lamp and candle hold the room in a pocket of amber while the panes become darker than the walls. The outside world shifts from scene to presence. You know the trees are there. You know the path is still pale between them. But now they are felt more than seen. The evening routine turns toward stillness. The oven is checked, and one tray of apple slices is turned so the back becomes the front. Their edges have begun to curl in by a whisper. A slice is lifted, tested, and set back for longer. The cinnamon has mellowed and gone deep. It now seems less a scent added to apples than something that has wandered into them and made a home there. When the oven door closes again, warmth lingers in the opened space and then folds itself back into the room. The candle is carried to the bedroom alcove, where it sets a brief, moving brightness on the washstand pitcher and along the comb's teeth. The basin water has gone cool. Hands are washed. The cloth is wrung and hung over the basin rim. In the small mirror above the stand, the candle doubles itself and trembles when the figure passes. The plum dressing gown is shaken open, its brushed cotton making a soft sigh. It is put on and tied loosely, more for the feeling of evening having reached its next chapter than for warmth alone. Returning to the main room, the shawl is folded and left over the chair back. The lamp remains lit, the candle returns to the table, and the room now looks more settled than before, as if the day's shape has finally been exchanged for the night's. A final cup of warm water is poured, this time with a slice of apple dropped in, not for flavor so much as for the pleasure of seeing it float and slowly turn. The slice spins a little, then stills against the side of the mug. At the window, the glass now reflects the room almost completely. The chair, the lamp, the candle, the shelves, and the basket of leaves all appear in the pane, floating over the dark that hides the orchard beyond. Yet, if you look steadily, outside, details still return by degrees. The nearest trunk, the suggestion of the path, a pale stone by the low wall catching what remains of the sky. The red leaf on the sill exists in both worlds at once now, tangible in the room and mirrored in the glass, its stem making that tiny click which seems to come from neither side alone. The fire in the stove has reached its best evening pace. There is no bright leaping now, only a low glow and the occasional fold of ember into deeper orange. Heat spreads evenly through the cottage floor and up the chair legs and into the table boards. The kettle has been moved aside so it does not sing. It merely keeps warm. Every so often, the metal cools and warms in tiny adjustments that sound almost like distant thought. These small mechanical murmurs and the leaf's dry tap become the night's nearest music. A curtain is drawn halfway over the back casement. The front upper pane remains slightly open for a while longer. Cool air threads inward, carrying the dark smell of orchard bark and dampening grass. It slips through the lamplit room and touches the sill. The leaf basket answers. One top leaf shivers at the edge. The narrow red one lets its stem lift and settle. Click. After so many hours, the sound no longer feels separate from the cottage. It feels woven into the grain of the evening, one stitch among others. There is time now to do nothing in particular and do it well. The chair by the window receives a quiet wait. The mug warms the hand. The book remains closed. The notebook is away. The fire is banked. The apple slices are drying by their own slow law. Beyond the reflected room in the pane, perhaps a moth passes through the dark near the porch and briefly whitens against the glass before moving on. Nothing asks to be followed. Somewhere outside, an apple lets go from a branch and lands in grass too softly to startle. You do not hear the fall as much as the faint afterthought of movement in the orchard. The tree nearest the cottage gives back to stillness at once. A line of smoke from the chimney drifts low and then levels out where the air above the field is colder. If there is wind farther up, it does not trouble the branches near the house. Here at the edge of the orchard, the world seems to be choosing gentleness one small thing at a time. The plate rack by the sink has dried what it was given. The mug from tea is put away. The cream mug with the chipped handle base goes back to its place on the shelf, turned so the chip faces inward as it always does. The plate is stacked. The last spoon is slipped into the jar. Water from the basin is carried out and poured at the edge of the thyme pot near the back step, where soil darkens silently. When the door opens and closes, the movement of air travels through the cottage and reaches the leaf basket on the sill. Click. then calm. A round tin of sewing notions still sits out on the table where it was set earlier. Its lid is put on and turned until the shallow metal catches line up and rest. The tin is blue, painted with tiny white flowers, long chipped at the edges. It returns to the drawer with a soft scrape of wood on wood. Beside it lies the notebook pencil, sharpened but worn down to half its first length. That too is put away. The table clears. Its cloth now shows an empty center under the lamp, a smooth, pale place that seems to invite nothing more than the candle's company. The candle has burned just enough to begin making a small pool around its wick. When the room shifts with an air current, the flame leans and then rights itself, and the melted wax trembles in answer. Shadows of chair, rung, and table leg move across the floorboards so slowly they might be mistaken for the board's darkening. On the sill, the leaf basket casts a low, netted shadow from its woven sides. The red leaf's outline falls over two yellow ones beneath it. Their layered stillness is one of the night's quietest arrangements. The oven trays are brought out at last and set on folded cloths to cool. The apple slices have changed from pale moons to amber crescents, some still soft, some already leathery at the rim. They are left where air can pass over them. No one counts them or samples them now. Their sweetness can wait for morning. One slice near the edge of the tray has curled enough to look almost like a petal. Almond. Another has a cinnamon line caught in its center where the spice settled. Even these small changes belong to the evening's slow workshop. A little jar is found for the driest slices, though only a few are ready. The lid is set aside while one or two pieces are placed inside. They make almost no sound against the glass. The rest stay on the tray beneath a clean cloth. Tomorrow they can finish. Tomorrow can do what tonight leaves undone. The acceptance of that is part of the cottage's calm. No task here argues with time. It simply meets the hour it has. The lamp is turned lower. At once the room draws inward. The brass base dims. The cloth on the table loses its blue hem and becomes pale cream in shade. The far shelf recedes. The candle now carries more of the visible evening, its flame bright in proportion to the softened lamp. In the window reflection, the room looks deeper and smaller all at once. The basket on the sill becomes a dark oval with a few leaf edges lit. Then the red stem catches the candle for an instant and taps against wicker again. The back of the chair receives the folded dressing gown sash when it slips loose and is tied again. One slipper is nudged slightly farther from the hearth. The rug corner by the door is set flat at last. These are nearly the final adjustments, the room and its keeper answering each other with tiny corrections until everything rests as it should. Outside, if there were any last bees among the clover at dusk, they are long gone to their hidden places. Their low drifts have given themselves over tonight. A basket under the side table holds kindling, and a few fresh pieces are added from the stack by the stove. This is not because they will be needed before sleep. It is for morning, so the first fire will already have its beginnings nearby. Small twigs, split lengths, bark curls, one pine cone saved from another season because it catches readily. They are arranged almost absent-mindedly, yet neatly all the same. Morning will come to a room prepared by evening's patience. The house has always liked that courtesy. Near the front door hangs a ring of keys with only 3 on it. One belongs to the little side shed, one to the pantry chest, though it is seldom locked, and one to a drawer that no longer needs guarding but still keeps the habit. The ring turns once on its peg as if from memory, then hangs still. The apples beneath it breathe out their faint sweetness. The cloth over one basket has loosened at the edge, making a small tent over the fruit. It is tucked in again with a light hand. The upper window pane is lowered and latched now. The cottage gives a tiny change in tone, as every closed room does when it finally keeps itself complete. Outside air remains as scent and memory rather than current. Without that thread of draft, the basket on the sill grows quieter. The red leaf no longer taps at once. It waits. Time passes. The candle flickers. The stove settles. Then, from some slower movement in the room's remaining warmth, the leaf stem finds the wicker rim once more, softer than before. Click. You might stand for a while at the front window, looking into the dark reflection and through it at the orchard where shapes have nearly dissolved. The nearest tree holds itself in a black lace of leaves against the last pale strip of sky. The field beyond is gone except for the sense of openness. The stone path from door to gate can still be guessed by a few lighter patches. Somewhere a late leaf turns over on the ground. Somewhere the line between one branch and the next is softened by darkness until it disappears. The candle is lifted again and carried from room to room, not because there are many rooms, but because each one likes its final glance. The pantry shelves, the sink, the back door latch, the washstand cloth hung to dry, the folded shirt on the chair, the bed alcove with its coverlet smooth and patient. None of this is inspection. It is simply recognition, as if the cottage and the one moving through it quietly acknowledge each other before rest. Even the basket of pressed leaves on the sill seems included in that exchange. On the mantel stands a small clock with a painted face and a crack across the lower number field. It is wound every few evenings, and tonight it receives 3 careful turns of the key. Its ticking has always been very soft, often lost under day noises, but now it joins the room more clearly. Tick, then space, then tick again. Yet even this does not take the lead from the leaf basket. The clock is regular. The leaf is not. One keeps measured time. The other keeps lived time, the time of air and cooling glass and warmth lifting from a stove. A final sip of the apple-warmed water is taken. The floating slice has drifted to the bottom and turned translucent at the edges. The mug is left by the basin to be washed in the morning. There is no need to make the room perfect against dawn. Dawn can meet a mug by the sink and think nothing of it. The candle is set down. The lamp is lowered another degree until its shade glows like a small moon behind cloth. Everything now has the softness of nearing completion. The chair by the window is given one last use. Sitting there, you can see the sill from below. The basket of leaves is close enough that the woven willow pattern shows in alternating light and shadow. The linen lining has a tiny thread lifted along one fold. The red leaf, still near the top, has begun to cup inward at one side, though the rest remains flat. Its stem rests with such gentleness on the basket rim that it is difficult to imagine it ever making a sound. Then it does. Click. Small, dry, exact, then gone. That is the sound the evening has chosen to gather around. Not the fire, though the fire has been faithful. Not the kettle, though it has warmed and cooled at its post. Not even the orchard bees, whose drowsy drifting belonged only to the sunlit part of the day. It is this little contact of leaf stem and wicker made possible by air too slight to see. It returns like a patient refrain. It says that things continue to move, even in near stillness. It says that settling is not the end of motion, only its gentlest form. The bed alcove is entered at last. The candle comes to, and the lamp in the main room remains low for another minute, casting a faint path behind. The dressing gown is hung on its peg. Slippers are set side by side on the mat. The coverlet is lifted and then laid back down. Through the half-open curtain between alcove and main room, the front window is still visible at an angle, and with it the suggestion of the basket on the sill. You cannot see the red stem from here, only the dark oval of leaves against darker glass. When the lamp is finally turned off, the cottage changes once more. The candle now holds the nearest things and lets the rest recede. The chair becomes outline. The table becomes edge. The stove window keeps a faint ember red, enough to mark the hearth's place in the room. Outside, the orchard and sky are nearly one. Indoors, the last visible movements are very small. Candle flame breathing, ember sinking, curtain easing a fraction and returning. Somewhere beyond sight, the pressed leaf basket remains attentive to every drift. The candle is pinched out. A thread of smoke rises, carrying wax and wick and the brief memory of flame. Darkness in the cottage is not empty. It is layered with known shapes. The bed, the chair, the window, the apples by the door, the tray of cooling slices, the broom on its hook, the folded shirt, the stacked wood. If you have moved among these things through such an evening, you do not need to see them to feel their places. The house holds them quietly, and they hold the house in return. In the dark, sounds separate more clearly. The clock on the mantel, the low resting shift from the stove, the almost inaudible settling of boards as the outer air cools. Farther away, perhaps a branch brushing another branch in the orchard. Then, after a pause long enough to deepen the quiet rather than break it, the tiny, dry note from the sill. The red leaf stem finding the wicker rim once more. It is softer now than it was at dusk, as if even the sound has put on evening clothes and lowered its voice. There is no need for the story to go anywhere beyond this. The day has already narrowed itself into simple traces. A room kept in order by small hands. Apples cooling by a blue door. Cinnamon settled into woodsmoke. Bees long since gone from the clover. Trays of sliced fruit waiting under cloth. A bed turned down. A field beyond the orchard lying flat under dark. And on the windowsill, a shallow willow basket lined with old linen where one narrow red leaf still answers the hidden movements of the room. The night deepens outside without announcement. Whatever breeze remains crosses the orchard slowly enough that no branch needs to say so. The apples by the door continue their cool, patient breathing of sweetness into the hall. The ash in the stove grows paler around its center. The clock gives away another measure and another. Between them all comes that fine leaf click now and then, farther apart perhaps, but still true, as if the cottage itself were thinking in the lightest possible way. If the room could be seen again in some later hour, it would look almost unchanged. The cloth would still cover one apple basket. The mug would still wait by the basin. The dried slices would still cool under linen. The chair would still face the window where the dark glass keeps its own soft secrets. And the leaf basket would still rest on the sill, holding oak and maple and apple leaves gathered from earlier walks, with the narrow red one near the top and its stem at the rim. Nothing more is required of the evening. Not an ending to be noticed, not a lesson, not a final event. Only this continued, nearly invisible settling. The orchard settling under night. The smoke settling low and fading. The warmth of the stove settling into brick and board. The last cinnamon in the air settling into cloth and wood. The pressed leaves settling into their basket. And the small red stem lifting and returning by the width of a breath, making its dry little sound as the cottage keeps its place at the edge of the orchard.